Hello everyone, what is up? It is me, AlbyMTG. For today's video, I have a deck tech for you guys. This is going to be a $100 modern deck, or if you're playing on Magic Online, comes in at just about 30 tickets on Magic Online. And this is going to be a Selesnya Miracle Fogs deck. So this is going to take a little bit of a card interaction, card synergy that I've found in the past that I think is a pretty cool little synergy, but I haven't really found a way to make it work yet. And so I knew I wanted to make some sort of a budget deck with it. I felt like that was probably the best place for it because it's not the kind of interaction that's super tier one kind of interaction, but it felt like it could have the potential to be a good interaction. And so the interaction that we're going to be talking about here in this deck is going to be the miracle cards. So for example, we have Entreat the Angels and Terminus. Terminus is going to end up being the control card for us, the way to remove a bunch of our opponent's creatures. We're not really playing any creatures. We're playing actually 0 creatures in the main deck, so the Terminus will be perfectly fine to wipe away the board and we won't care about it. And then Entreat the Angels is our main win condition here in the main. We have Entreat the Angels to create some 4/4 angel tokens, which is a very fast way to end the game. Even if we have to hard cast this sometimes the game will go late enough and we'll just be able to hard cast for, several angels, maybe 2 or 3 angels, and that should still be enough. Getting that many 4/4 bodies should still be enough to close out a game. And then, of course, if we can set up the miracle for it, then we can really get a fantastic deal on the Entreat the Angels, and we can make a ton of angels and then just end up beating our opponents quite easily with the angel tokens. And so the interaction that I was talking about earlier was these miracle cards with cards like Noxious Revival and Reclaim. So Noxious Revival and Reclaim say put target card from a graveyard on top of its owner's library. And so if we go back to the miracle cards here with Entreat the Angels and Terminus, the miracle, the way that miracles work, it says you may cast this card for its miracle cost when you draw it, and if it's the first card that you've drawn this turn. So being able to put them back on top of our library with cards like Noxious Revival and cards like Reclaim allows us to cast them again, or if they end up going to the graveyard because of something like, I don't know, a discard spell or something like that, we can get them back, which is kind of important for us because we only have the 4 Entreat the Angels as our win conditions. So this essentially gives us an extra 6 copies of the Entreat the Angels to be able to recur back, get more creatures out on the board, and then just end up beating our opponents with the Entreat the Angels token. So this is the kind of interaction that the entire deck ended up being focused around. Was I wanted to create a deck that was really good with this interaction. And so the main way I found to build this deck was that there was one of 2 ways. The first way was to go with kind of like a turbo graveyard strategy where you're trying to mill the miracle cards and then put them back on top of your library with Noxious Revival and Reclaim. Or you could play more of a control game and then just use the Noxious Revivals and the Reclaims to set up the Terminus instead of the Entreat the Angels later on in the game. And I ended up choosing that second route. Maybe there's a little bit of a self-mill strategy that, it needs to be worked on a little bit more, but maybe there's something in the future that miracles and self-mill could work out with the Noxious Revival and the Reclaim. But again, the route that I ended up taking was a very control-based route, and then just using those cards to generate value and to win us the game later on when the Entreat the Angels becomes, just game-winning, or if we need to replay the Terminus against these creature-based strategies. And so the way that I found to make us go into the long game was that we're going to play a bunch of fogs. We're going to play Turbo Fog, essentially. But what sets us apart from a typical Turbo Fog deck is that the typical Turbo Fog decks will end up winning by milling out their opponent, while we're actually winning with creatures. We're winning with the Entreat the Angels tokens. For those of you that don't know what a Fog is named after the card that you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen, Fog. It's 1 green mana for an instant, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. And you can see Holy Day is the same card, except it's white instead of green. And so we're running 4 copies of Holy Day and 3 copies of Fog in the deck. The reason I ended up with 4 copies of Holy Day, 3 copies of Fog, were much more heavy on the white side than the green side. And when I thought about cards like Ethereal Haze was another one that we had that we could have also been playing like 3/3 and 1 for Ethereal Haze. Ethereal Haze is essentially just the same card with these effects. I ended up choosing the Holy Days and the Fogs. They were both the cheapest options, and when you're building a budget deck, that's kind of important as well to take into consideration. And then the Holy Day, I feel like if people are going to be playing cards like Meddling Mage, or if they're going to be playing cards like, I don't know, Nevermore, for example, something that says the named card can't be cast, they're going to name Fog more than Holy Day. The deck itself is named after the card Fog, so when you think about the small incremental advantages that probably never show up, maybe show up once or twice in your entire time playing the deck, those are the kind of situations that as a deck builder you kind of have to think about, and so that's why we ended up playing 4 Holy Day and 3 Fog for those situations with cards like Meddling Mage where our opponents are most likely going to be naming Fog and not Holy Day, and because we're much more heavy on the white side and not so much on the green side, we're ending up playing the 4 copies of Holy Day. So these are our 1 mana Fogs, which then takes us onto our 2 mana Fogs. We have 4 Angel Song, 3 Dawn Charm, and 2 Haze of Fallen. Angel Song and Haze of Pollen both say prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn, and then they both have Cycling, which is really nice. Cycling for 2 on Angel Song means that we're playing 4 Angel Song. Cycling on 3 for Haze of Pollen means that we're only playing 2 of the Haze of Pollens instead. What I really like about the cycling on these is it allows us to set up situations where we put Terminus on top of our library, or we put Entreat the Angels on top of our library, and then we can go to our opponent's turn. And obviously, we're not going to draw a card at the beginning of our opponent's turn, so if we cycle an Angel Song or we cycle a Haze of Pollen on our opponent's turn with a Terminus or an Entreat the Angels on top of our library, we can then cast it for its miracle cost, despite, we're essentially getting those great cards, Entreat the Angels and Terminus at instant speed if we need them. If we know that they're on the top of our library, we can cycle, draw them as the first card for our turn on our opponent's turn, and then end up just blowing out our opponent like that. And so I really like the interaction between the cycling cards and the miracle cards. We've seen it a lot in Modern as well, with cards like Terminus and Opt working very well in terms of synergistically casting Opt on your opponent's turn to try and scry and then draw into a Terminus to wipe the board at instant speed. And then the other card here in the middle was Dawn Charm, which I'm a huge fan of Charms. Charms are some of my favorite cards in Magic, if not my favorite cards. I love the fact that they're able to do so many different things and that they're so viable in so many different situations because they're able to do several things. So in this case, we're either going to be preventing all combat damage that would be dealt this turn, which again, it's a Fog, that's why it's mainly in the deck. We can regenerate target creature, which is something we probably will never be doing, or we can counter target spell that targets you. So if our opponent has some sort of game-ending spell that's targeting us, if we need to counter that, we have the possibility to do that here with Dawn Charm. Or if we just need another Fog, then Dawn Charm can act as a Fog. Again, this also prevents things like burn spells that would maybe be targeting us. We can go ahead and counter the burn spell that's trying to hit us. We can do things like if our opponent is trying to look at our hand with an Inquisition or a Thoughtseize effect, something along those lines, we can Dawn Charm to counter that. So I really like Dawn Charm. I was hoping to squeeze in the 4th copy here, but I ended up just going with the 3. So these are our 2 mana Fogs. After the 2 mana Fogs, we have ways that kind of just set up the deck. So Treasure Map is a great card in Standard right now, but also ended up making 3 copies here in this deck because it does exactly what we want to do. It allows us to scry, which again, we can put the miracle cards on the top of our library if we need them, or if we need the miracle cards on the bottom of our library, we don't want to, Terminus this turn, we don't want to Entreat the Angels this turn, we can go ahead and get that out of the way so we can draw another relevant card, like another Fog or something along those lines. So the Treasure Map and being able to scry is fantastic. Again, another way for us to draw instant speed cards as well, or to draw cards at instant speed as well on our opponent's turn. If we flip this around and then sacrifice a treasure token along with tapping the land, we get to draw a card. And so that's another fantastic way for us to draw cards at instant speed, allowing us to do the Terminus and the Entreat the Angels at instant speed. So 3 copies of Treasure Map, and again, it's very important to note that we're in the early game, we're not really doing much. Most decks in Modern like to be proactive. They like to have their 1-drop. They like to be, having 1-drop, 2-drop, and, just going super curving out every single turn. We're looking to do more setup in the beginning. We're looking to kind of play some tapped dual lands and then maybe play a Treasure Map to set us up, because we don't really need to play Fog if we're only being hit for like 2 damage. That's not something we really care too much about in the grand scheme of things. We want to wait until our opponents are playing or are attacking us for, heavier chunks, like 8 points of damage, 10 points of damage. That's when we want to start using the Fogs. And so Treasure Map, again, just a great card for the early game, helps us set up. and allows us to do the scrying for the miracle cards. And then Glimpse the Sun God again is another card kind of like that, where Glimpse the Sun God is fine in the early game and then just gets worse as the game goes later on. But it taps X creatures, so again, if we have to pump a bunch of mana into it, that's not really something we're hoping to do. But like worst case scenario, we just cast it for 1 white mana to scry 1, which isn't like the worst in the world. It allows us to again try and put a miracle card on the top of our library, and it's a fine one. Of if I was gonna cut any card from the main deck, it would probably be this Glimpse the Sun God. But like it's a fine card. Acts as another fog if we need it, or acts as another scry effect if we need the scry effect. And so those are kind of our early game setups. And then the final card we have in the main deck is 2 copies of Oblivion Ring. This deck is absolutely abysmal against Planeswalkers. Planeswalkers are without a doubt your biggest threat, because Planeswalkers try to kill you in ways that aren't, combat damage. And so we don't really have any other ways of dealing with them outside of Oblivion Rings. So we ended up playing the Oblivion Rings, where this also helps us against like combo cards, like maybe Training Grounds. I don't know if you're playing the Training Grounds combo deck, this is a way to get rid of the Training Grounds. What makes this important is that it's non-land permanent, so we don't just have to worry about creatures. We've got the creatures under control. We have fogs for days, but we need to pay a little bit of attention to the non-creature threats that our opponents might have, and so that's why we have the Oblivion Rings in the main deck. And so that takes us onto the mana base here. So we can see 4 Temple of Plenty, 4 Stirring Wildwood. So again, Temple of Plenty allows us to do some scrying, set up the deck for how we need it to be. Stirring Wildwood can act as a creature if we need it to, but mainly just being a tapped dual land will be its main purpose in this deck. Also, it was just extremely cheap in comparison to something like Sun Petal Grove or Windswept Heath, or Temple Garden as well. Windswept Heath would have been nice because they have the ability to shuffle, so if we do a bunch of scrying and then we know we have our miracle cards on the bottom, it allows us to shuffle and kind of rearrange those with the miracle cards and the fetch lands. But Stirring Wildwood will still be perfectly fine. Very cheap inclusion for this deck. Helps out the mana quite a lot. So these are kind of like our setup lands that we're really hoping to have one of these on turn 1. And then we have some colorless lands here as well. Zhalfirin Void allows us to scry again, and then Field of Ruin. Again, we're pretty bad against Tron, so Field of Ruin will be a way for us to destroy some non-basic lands, most likely the Tron lands, and does allow us to do the shuffling again, like I said, with the Windswept Heath. If we're doing so much scrying and we want to scry all of our miracle cards to the bottom in the early game, Field of Ruin is a way for us to reshuffle our library so that we can get those miracle cards back into circulation later on in the game and then have the potential to draw them. And then finally, we just have the basics: 3 forests, 7 plains. Like I said, we were much heavier on the plains than we were on the forests, so we ended up playing a significantly higher number of plains than forests. We're perfectly fine against Blood Moon. 10 basics should be more than enough to counteract a Blood Moon. And then, of course, with the Field of Ruins, you should never miss on a Field of Ruin either. You should always be able to have a basic that you can hit, so if you're going up against something like Grixis Death Shadow, you don't feel like you're just 1-for-1ing yourself. Maybe they don't have any basics left in their deck, or even humans as well. That's a deck that doesn't run many basics, so that's just something to keep in mind with your Field of Ruins. You have more than enough basics, so you should be able to fire off the Field of Ruins quite well. And then that leads us into the sideboard. Something that I like to do for the sideboard on all of my videos is I like to remind you guys that the sideboards change depending on your meta. If you're planning on playing this at your LGS, then change your sideboard accordingly. If you're planning on playing this on Magic Online, change your sideboard according to the decks that you think you're going to see, depending on whether you're playing in the casual lobbies, whether you're playing in the competitive lobbies. Change your sideboard accordingly. This is just going to be a little bit of a sample sideboard, so maybe you'll get like a little bit of an idea about what the sideboard is kind of looking to do. And so yeah, without further ado, we'll go ahead and get into it. So here we have kind of the catch-alls. So another copy of Oblivion Ring. Again, we're really bad against Planeswalkers. Pithing Needle, again, can name Planeswalkers, can also name a few other things, as long as they have activated abilities that we're not really looking to have happen against us. And then Nevermore, again, just like the biggest catch-all. Name a non-land card. The named card can't be cast. So if your opponent is maybe playing Storm, for example, Storm is another matchup we're quite bad against because Storm's not winning with combat damage. They're just firing grape shots at our face. So Nevermore naming Grape Shot would be a fantastic way of kind of slowing down that Storm deck, forcing them to maybe find something to remove the Nevermore before they're able to combo off. So these are just kind of like some catch-alls essentially for the sideboard, the kind of things that you will be bringing in against multiple matchups, but aren't just like silver bullets against any matchups. Here we have Witchbane Orb, Damping Sphere, and Elixir of Immortality. Witchbane Orb gives you hexproof, so very good against the decks that are looking to do things to you personally. So things like against Storm, where they're trying to use Grape Shot again. You having hexproof will be a way of getting around the Grape Shot. Damping Sphere again is great against both Tron and Storm, which I have said aren't really the best matchups for us. And then Elixir of Immortality again allows us to, if we're going against a very, very long game, maybe something like blue-white control, this will be a way for us to make sure that we're just not going to end up losing due to milling ourselves or anything like that. So Elixir of Immortality, a very fine one to have in your sideboard. I wouldn't really run more than one. You only really need the one. And then we have some silver bullet cards. They're, like I said, mainly everything in that first 2 pages was just kind of like, not necessarily silver bullets, but more of just kind of like your basic catch-all sort of things. But Core Firewalker here, that's definitely a silver bullet against mono-red aggressive decks, or Burn, which is mainly where you'll see it. And then Tormod's Crypt, again, targeting the graveyard-based strategies, things like Dredge, Vengevine, Hollow One, those sort of strategies as well. And then that takes us on to the last set of sideboard cards that we have here, which are our alternate win conditions. So Gaia's Revenge and Approach of the Second Sun. If we're expecting them to bring in some sideboard cards against our strategy of winning with Entreat the Angels, then we have Approach of the Second Sun as an alternative way that we can possibly win the game. And then Gaia's Revenge, again, we're really bad against Control too, because they're not really looking to attack us very much. They're just looking to generate value with Planeswalkers. So Gaia's Revenge is a fantastic way for us to just end the game very quickly. We'll go up against a control opponent. We'll play the first few turns and things like that, where it'll be kind of like a little bit back and forth. They'll be setting up, we'll be setting up, but little do they know that we have this giant trump card to just, as soon as we play Gaia's Revenge, the game is essentially over. Can't be countered, has haste, 8 power, and can't be the target of non-green spells or abilities from non-green sources. So very, very strong card against your blue-white controls, your blue-black controls, Esper control, anything along those lines. So just a very good card there for Gaia's Revenge. So this is a deck that I think could be a lot of fun depending on your playstyle. If you're looking to make friends, maybe don't make the deck. But if you're if you're looking to have a little bit of fun on a budget and maybe win a few matches here and there, then this could be a fantastic deck for you. Learn a little bit more about being patient. Knowing when to play your fogs, learning a little bit more about the metagame, what you should care about, and things like that. I think this could be a fine deck for that. Another thing that I wanted to point out here, while we still have the Gaia's Revenge and the Approach of the Second Sun up, is that since our win condition is different from the typical Turbo Fog decks. Typical Turbo Fog is winning by milling you out, no other win conditions at all, no creatures in the sideboard usually either, just going to mill you out. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to win with creatures. So if we're running Entreat the Angels and they board out all their creature removal like they would normally do against Turbo Fog, they're going to be in for trouble. We're going to have a turn where we resolve our Entreat the Angels, have enough Angels, and they just won't be able to deal with it. So this deck forces them to keep in bad spells like creature removal, despite us running very, very few creatures, because our win condition is still creature-based. So it requires them to not just, typically sideboard out all their removal. If they're going to sideboard out all their removal, we're going to run them over with Entreat the Angels. That's just how this is going to work. So I kind of like how it works kind of against what you would typically expect for a strategy when it comes to sideboarding. You would expect to sideboard out all your removal against Turbo Fog, but if they're going to do that, they're going to lose the game because we're a creature-based strategy to win the game. So I think it's a very interesting deck, to say the least. It's going to be a fun one, and hopefully you guys did enjoy it. So thank you guys so much for watching today's video. If you guys did enjoy the deck tech and you want to see more deck techs like this in the future, be sure to let me know down below in the comment section. Also, be sure to let me know, in terms of budget, is $100 for a budget still considered a budget deck? That's kind of where I leave my mark. Is I think for an Eternal Eternal format, $100 is, you know, a fine number for a budget deck. Obviously, we'd love for it to be, you know, $15, $20, but to make a reasonable deck, I think $100 is probably reasonable for a budget. So let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section regarding that. Let me know your thoughts on the deck, any cards that you would add in or possibly change. Be sure to let me know that as well. And yeah, with that being said, thank you so much for watching and spending the time with me here today to learn about this deck, and I'll see you guys here next time for another Magic the Gathering video. Thank you all so much for watching today's video where we did a deck tech on Selesnya Miracle Fogs. Of course, at the end of all of my videos, I'd love to give a huge shout out and thank you to my patrons over on the Patreon page. So huge shout out and thank you to Jayathy Swarin, Jeremy, Jason, Rodrigo, Daniel, and BadWolfMTG. The 6 of them are supporting me over on the Patreon page. Absolutely appreciate the support that they give me. It's crazy and mind-blowing that they're willing to do so. So I greatly appreciate what they do for me over on the Patreon page. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you guys here next time.